going on, guys? Thanks for tuning into my channel again today. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and subscribe to my channel. I appreciate all your support. Now, today, what we will be covering is we will be covering the real wage growth in the United States from 1870 to 1970, and then the impact of Nixon's economic policies. So, Richard Nixon, the president, he had an incentive put in an economic policy in 1971, which saw him take the US dollar off the gold standard. And that's what we're going to be watching in this presentation today. Okay. And basically, this is analysis of wage trends and economic policies over time to sort of have a bit of a look at historically what sort of happened throughout the US economy and how that can affect other economies in the world that potentially follow the US economy to some degree. So we're going to move over to the next slide. So we're going to start off with a bit of real wage growth in the USA. So from 1870 to 1970, every decade on average we saw wage growth through the United States. This was a boom period throughout the Industrial Revolution. Um, as we sort of moved into more the depression-based era, obviously we saw massive declines, but as we came out of the depression, we saw massive increases as well. And post World War II, America aligned their currency in line with the gold standard. So it was the currency it was valued at the same amount as what goal was. So, if it was worth something. So you couldn't just go and print more money because if you did, then you would have, a disparity between gold and that. So basically, we're going to start off here. So in the US in the 1870s, that was sort of the Civil War based period. Between the North and the South. Real wage growth was relatively modest throughout that period. It averaged around 1.5% per year. And this era saw the rise of factories and urbanization with an increasing demand for labor throughout the US economy. The 1880s continued the trend of industrial growth, the expansion of railroads and the steel industry. So, Andrew Carnegie, all those guys that uh, started to rise as the early oligarchs in that period. Sort of started to sort of capitalize off this. Real wages grew at an average of an annual rate of around 2% throughout this period. However, there was a lot of labour unrest and strikes and high tensions between workers and employers. 1890s were marked by economic sort of depression, panic of 1893, which led to a slowdown in wage growth. However, wages grew still at about 1% per year throughout that period. This decade also saw significant labour movements, including the Pullman strike of 1894. Throughout the 1900s and the movement into the 20th century, we saw really strong economic growth and prosperity through the US. This progressive era brought about labour reforms and better working conditions for people. Real wage growth averaged around 2.5% annually, supported by increased productivity and technological advancements. This was sort of the period where Henry Ford brought in the 40-hour working week, the 9 to 5 working day, and we started to see technological innovation in factories for workers. So workers would work less typically than what they would have in the 19th century. So we sort of saw the rise, I guess, of the 40-hour work week here in the early 20th century. 1910s, this was sort of World War One. So a bit of a impact on wage growth there, but the rate was still around 3%. The 1920s, very sort of characterized economic prosperity and consumerism. Real wages grew at an average annual rate of 2.8%. However, there's a lot of uneven growth here, especially with the stock market crash in 1929, leading to the Great Depression. 1930s Great Depression, real wages only grew like 0.5% throughout this period, quite small. 1940s, World War II. Um, this is sort of when we start to see the post-war economic boom that revitalized wage growth. I believe that's when um, the US dollar was aligned with the gold standard, and wages grew at an average rate of 3.5% through this era. 1950s, uh, we sort of had economic stability and growth. Real wages grew at an average annual rate of 2.7%. Um, and we sort of started to see a bit of a rise of the middle class in this period. So, increased consumerism again, but suburbanization defined this era. So, Americans started to experience high standards of living. They were able to go and buy houses, take out a mortgage, and standard of living was much higher than in previous decades or centuries. So 60s, obviously, we saw, some feats like man going to the moon. The average wage growth was 2.5% per year. So this saw significant social and political changes, as well as government initiatives aimed at reducing poverty and inequality. So there was some good things there that sort of changed up a little bit. So that kind of covers that first part of this today, and brings us up to the Nixon the Nixon policy in 1971 to take the US off the gold standard, which is commonly referred to as the Nixon shock. Um, and yeah, as I said here, these are all the factors here that have contributed to wage growth over time. So labor supply and demand, changes in productivity. We can sort of see all this happening out in front of us, our eyes now. We've had big technological advancements with AI. Um, you know, unemployment, if that's low and there's still high demand for services, then you're going to see um, you know, increases in wages there. So um, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to I'm going to touch on the end of the gold standard with Nixon. And what I'm going to do is we're just going to go through what sort of effect that sort of had um, on the US. So with Nixon, so basically the US dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. So pre 1971, you could use the US dollar to buy gold, and this currency had value because it was aligned to gold. Um, but the decision known from the Nixon shock was aimed at addressing inflation, trade deficits, and overvaluation of the dollar. Okay. The impact this had on the US economy was the end of the gold standard led to a period of currency devaluation and fluctuations in exchange rates because the US could now print more money. Or the Federal Reserve could now print more money throughout this period, which provided the US with greater flexibility in monetary policy, but it also contributed to economic instability and uncertainty. And I can show some data on this particular period. I come up here and I go use US CPI, Consumer Price Index, to measure inflation up here. What I can see here is you can see on the screen that in 1971, it was pretty solid. Okay, so from the 1971, inflation's pretty low here. It goes 1972, still pretty low, and then from there we start to see some of the biggest increases in the 3-year period in between 1973 and 1981. So that sort of just goes to show, um, if you take a currency against something that has value like gold, away from gold, and you go and print more money, uh, you then that money then is sort of and the country prints more and more money. It leads to um, economic instability because the cost of all goods and services increases at a really fast rate, and that's sort of what we've seen here. We've seen all goods and services throughout the US economy really increase throughout that period, in addition to rising consumerism, which, obviously leads to a bit of a mixed effect there because it's good for the economy because spending's up, some businesses make more money, but it's more expensive for consumers, and as a result, you're going to start to see a slowing increase in real wage growth because if the government prints out more money, uh, then and there's more spending, people aren't going to have as much. Their purchasing power will diminish. So, on that, since implementation of wage and price controls aim to tackle rising inflation and stabilize the economy during a crisis. Immediate effects, the wage and price controls resulted in short-term effects on wage growth and consumer prices, impacting economic dynamics. So that's basically what I just said. Short-term affected the rate of real wage growth. It stagnated wage growth throughout that period, um, and uh, and consumer prices obviously were impacted there as well. Future economic debates, this policy set the stage for future debates on wage control effectiveness and its implications for market economics. So, there's still an argument to say that this policy created inflation within the economy, and if the currency was still aligned with the gold standard, would wage growth be as low as it is today? And has this created a wealth gap within our society, and a level of inequality in our society? So we can sort of see here that monetary policy changes, the end of the global standard significantly changed monetary policies, allowing for more flexible currency management. Um, so, that there is more flex, I guess, because the government's able to inject more money back into the economy, which could provide some benefits there, a little bit more flexibility, inflationary pressures. Obviously, that was, it impacted purchasing power, what I just said, and leading to economic um, stability as well. So people were sort of probably struggling a little bit, but they probably would have experienced um, the people that bought in the 1950s. They would have seen some probably good capital growth. People that did sort of capitalize through that period before the policies, but people who hadn't acquired assets throughout that period, you know, obviously it would have been much harder to sort of with rising interest rates and to sort of get some control back on inflation. That's affected a lot of people's money in their pockets and disposable income because they're losing so much out of their paycheck every week, and then there hasn't been that real wage growth either, which once again feeds back into that wealth inequality piece. So, capitalizing before a big decision like this is essential. Next, we've got wage growth impact. So the inflationary environment resulting from the gold standards abandonment affected wage growth negatively in subsequent decades. So, um, obviously it's sort of changed over a period of time there. All right. So what I want to talk about now is after this Nixon shock in 1971, taking America off the gold standard, we also saw, and this is the second part of this, we saw a rise of the free market economy in the USA. So basically, um, these policies reducing government sort of intervention in the economy and promoting competition. Basically, if that's basically what a free market is. A free market is little government involvement and letting businesses just run based on supply and demand. So basically, in a free market-based system, you would just get businesses that dominate a particular industry or monopolize a certain industry would have full market control. Say you've got in the country you live in, you've got two or three supermarkets that make up 95% of the supermarket market. Um, and then, a small shop assistant goes to start up his, or a group of guys get together and, or girls get together and start up their own supermarket or corner store and try and compete. They can, get pushed out of the market by the bigger businesses because they can sort of control prices, drop their prices, and for a certain period of time, the little smaller company can't afford to compete, and then they pop a massive loss, and then they're out of business. So there's a few like pros and cons with a free market based system and principles. Um, but basically, free markets work on minimal government intervention, government involvement in economic activities, fostering individual choice and competition. So, it's just about allowing choice. I guess, in a free market-based system, it would push people more. You could argue that it could push people more to potentially innovate and create new emerging technologies and find new areas of business because it would be difficult to enter with competing businesses that monopolize certain markets, or in other markets you might find that um, some businesses don't have as much market share and it's a little bit more of a free for all. And um, so, yeah, pros and cons, as I said, wage setting mechanisms. The shift towards free market principles has transformed wage setting mechanisms to be more influenced by supply and demand dynamics. So, uh, basically, with free market principles, it's uh, they can sort of set the wage based on how well the business does. If more people buy in the business and business is better, then wage growth will be more. If people buy less, then the wage growth will be non-existent, and the unemployment rate might go up. So, it just sort of just changes the system and the dynamics a little bit. But the free market approach, I'd probably consider it, as an economist, I would say that it's a little bit more of a capitalist sort of approach because uh, it favors conservative, right-wing capitalist over the worker, for sure. Because what government policy does is it ensures that there's a level of I guess, uh, equality um, across all different sort of workers within businesses, and sort of promotes the sort of working rights to some degree. Um, Economic policy changes. What's that one? Just get that back. Overall, economic policies have evolved to prioritize market dynamics, encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship in various sectors. Okay. Um, So just coming back to Nixon's next decision and policy, we saw throughout this period, um, he really focused on kind of reducing government intervention in the economy and promoting competition. So what he was essentially doing is setting up this free market system to prosper within the United States. Um, so this led to increased efficiency and innovation in some sectors. Um, and it also resulted in income inequality and the erosion of workers' rights. So that sort of just comes back to what I was sort of talking about before. You sort of have a bit of a problem there with, um, workers' rights from an individual employee level, but it allows big businesses to thrive, this sort of system. Some of the long-term sort of consequences here were um, Nixon's policies. They sort of free market had profound effects on the US economy. The end of the gold standard allowed for greater control over monetary policy, leading to periods of inflation and deflation. The shift towards a free market economy brought about significant changes in labour markets, with real wage growth slowing in subsequent decades. So we can see that the country's economy has gotten better. So anyone who's invested in the S&P 500 would have got strong returns throughout that period, um, uh, or throughout those decades. However, um, it's led to significant growth in several sectors, boosting wages for many workers. So yeah, obviously positive economic growth there, kind of long term in several sort of sectors. So but we've still seen some wage disparities there across different sectors, and that comes with a free market economy as well, because the wages are set by supply and demand, and if the business thrives and does well, and there's high demand from consumers for their products, the um, the employees will be remunerated and get a higher income. But if the demand isn't there for their products and they're left with excessive supply, and they can't sell that supply, then obviously wage growth is going to go down or stay stagnant. So they're all sort of labour market complexities there. So there's going to be a bit of stagnation, a bit of growth across different types of industries there due to this type of system. Okay, overall impact. Just finishing up here, guys. If you're still tuning in, you're absolute legends. Um, so comparative analysis of wage growth pre and post 1970. So wage growth trends before 1970 show consistent increases, while post 1970 trends exhibit fluctuations and slower growth. The impact of Nixon's policies, including wage and price control, significantly influenced wage growth patterns in the following decades, which, to some degree, some would argue that we're still seeing today. Economic shifts, post 1970 economic shifts, including globalization and technological advancements, have contributed to changing wage dynamics. So this kind of some of this is relevant now to what we're sort of experiencing with AI. We're seeing, and we saw a lot of globalization, and now we're seeing technological advancements with the way that we do things with automation. Um, so as that sort of changes, it sort of raises the question for the future. Um, how will labor rights sort of change? What sort of impact and uh, sort of implications will this have on employees? That's sort of all yet to be determined. But we could see, if businesses thrive with AI, we could see, and consumerism remains quite high. We could see wage growth increases based on what we've sort of seen here historically, and AI may very well be positive for everybody. Um, there's research to sort of say with capitalism comes a higher standard of living for everybody over time, as there's more technological advancements and more innovation. And if we look at, for example, today we have everybody's got iPhones. The oldest iPhone in society, if you're in a Western country, might be a 13 or a 12, or and some people have got the latest 15, 16, whatever it is. And everyone, and if we look back at, say 2009, 2010, when an iPhone first came out and it was rivaling BlackBerry, not many people could afford those phones. They had to have, cheap Nokias for, a couple $100 back in those days. So everyone has seen a higher standard of living. Same with TVs. They've developed and they've become better over time. Everyone's got a flat widescreen TV now, 50, 60 inches if you're in a Western country. If you're in a small place, maybe 30 or 40, but that was a real luxury going back 15 years ago. So, everyone's standard of living increases over time with these changes, and changes don't necessarily mean it's going to be a bad economic time. Okay, so correlation between policy changes and wage trends. So just here, this is a little bit extra. We probably won't touch on that today because we've got to wrap up here. But in conclusion here, period from 1870 to 1970 in the United States was marked by significant changes in real wage growth, influenced by industrialization, wars, economic policies, labor movements, Nixon's decision to take the US off the gold standard, and the rise of free market policies, which had lasting impacts on the US economy, shaping the economic landscape for decades to come. Understanding these historical trends provides valuable insights into the complexities of wage growth and economic policy within the modern era. So that's the end of my talk today. And the last thing I just want to touch on here is I want to look at the USD per capita. So, or the GDP per capita, because you want to look at a few things to determine real wage growth. But looking at CPI and GDP per capita is a good sort of idea to sort of see what's kind of going on. So if we look at GDP per capita, the country has increased, and in an economic sense, it's done really well. Over time here, we've seen this nice upward growth trend, which is reflective in the S&P 500's performance throughout this 63-year period. But if we look at the CPI and factor this in as well, we've seen a downward trend here especially since the Nixon's economic initiative there to come off the gold standard. So you factor both these things in, and you can start to sort of get the picture of, okay, well, there's too much spending, too much printing of money, but there is a lot of money going through the US economy. So hopefully that helped you get a bit of an idea, sort of towards what we might be facing in the future historically, how the free market system works, and what that policy in 1971 did to sort of change the world in which we live in to some degree. If you enjoy this channel, hit subscribe, and I'll look forward to catching you again soon. Cheers, guys.